Okay, so I have this little story here. Upon reflection, showed me that God's miracles don't have to be huge miracle monstrosities in order to be life changing. I have a second story after this first one as well, which fits the mold of traditional miracle fodder a bit more. And I want you guys to decide if one or both or neither constitutes a true modern day miracle in your eyes, okay? As I mentioned in my last video, I was saved in late 2017, November to be specific. I have this journal entry which I made the day it happened, which is why I know the exact date. I can remember the day like it was yesterday, but before I get too far down the wrong road, I need to give you some background to bring you up to where I was the night in December that this first miracle started 6.5 years ago. I had started smoking cigarettes as a 14-year-old human. The year was 1987, and Benson and Hedges menthols were my brand. My grandfather had been a lifelong smoker until he was laid low by a major heart attack at age 50. This caused him, thankfully, to quit cold turkey. As a result, my mother, who was my only parent figure, became wisely completely against smoking. And like the worst thing you could do around my mom from that day forward was to merely exist and be a smoker. Also, something you couldn't miss if you spent any time around her. "Oh my God, that person over there just lit a cigarette," she'd say, as we sat in the bar area of a smoke-filled restaurant. "We need to go. Maybe they can move them. Excuse me, waiter. Yes, that man just lit a cigarette." Waiter staring at my mom, glancing around the room at the 19 other people puffing away, and then slowly back to my mom. In case some of you weren't alive then, any bar area of any restaurant was consistently filled with smoke from open to close. This wasn't unique. My mom, however, was unique. I say that with total and unabashed love for her, by the way. Up until about 2000-ish, it was still considered cool to smoke, something which is pretty hard to conceptualize considering the world we live in today. And as a lost and miserable girl who had no sense of self, the idea that I could put on this cool girl persona simply by lighting up, man, you couldn't pry those cigs out of my smelly nicotine-stained hand. Fast forward 30 years. Smoking is not so cool anymore. In fact, the fact that I smoked made me feel like an absolute pariah in the modern world that we lived in, that we do live in, especially since I had started this process of learning to become healthier in all the ways that are possible. Secretly rushing through the meal in order to get outside after dinner and get into my vehicle where I could light up without offending anyone. That's awful. You know, it just feels bad. It wasn't lost on me that I was losing time with the people who mattered the most to me in the world in order to go sit alone in the dark outside and suck on a cigarette. Speaking for myself only here, anytime I can't do something in front of other people without feeling this kind of nagging sense of shame, that's my sign to evaluate whether the thing is truly something I should feel shameful about, or merely that I'm breaking some kind of societal norm in a positive way, and come to the understanding that maybe I'm not willing to overly concern myself with the perception of the world around me. You know, kind of like when you start a YouTube channel at 50. LOL. But it was becoming very clear to me as time went on that my smoking was a very negative thing, and not just because of the new laws trying to ban smoking everywhere and the change in perception by not only the media, but everyone around me. Now, along those lines, of course, smoking was obviously harming me physically. Physically? I was diagnosed in 2015 with Graves' disease and additionally 2 other autoimmune diseases. And the last thing that heals an autoimmune disease is inhaling chemicals and nicotine 18 hours every day. And further, there was a financial strain associated with smoking. One pack of cigarettes cost $10. And by 2017, I was smoking a half a pack per day. That's $150 a month. I would consider the things I could purchase for my family, my home, for myself, with an extra $150 every month. At that point, I knew I had to stop. But the question was how? I've always been someone who has a really hard time with the act of starting to do something, really hyping it up, even if it's only to myself, and then quitting or failing. I mean, probably everyone has a hard time with that. As I say this, I'm realizing. But regardless, it's for this reason I've learned not to bite off more than I can chew in life, to work in small bits and pieces toward my goals instead of like going all in 100%. I've learned that life isn't linear, and often there can be many stops and starts with anything we undertake as a life change, right? Ultimately, knowing that small improvements, small chunks of growth lead to success more often than going hard and hitting a wall, causing me to give up, made me kind of never try to quit smoking before, because it's one of those things, at least for me, that I knew I would have to go all in on. Does this make sense? Now, I have to add that once early on in nursing school, when I realized that it was very hypocritical for me to be in school learning how to help others in healing and growing healthier while I personally was sucking down cigarettes on my breaks, I did try to quit. But it was very forced and miserable, and it never became easier, even though I did end up succeeding in quitting for about a year. When the first opportunity came to go back to smoking, I don't remember anymore what the reason was, but probably a breakup or a really bad day, who knows. I just went right back to it, and I was very happy to do so. It didn't stick. So because of this long ago experience, I knew how hard quitting was going to be, as well as how unlikely it was that I would stick to quitting, even if I did somehow actually manage to do it in the first place. I mean, we're talking a 30-plus year habit to one of the most addictive chemicals known to humankind. So flash forward, now we're back in December 2017. And here I am, sitting outside on my front porch. It's snowing lightly. I'm all cozy in my big hoodie, wearing my leggings, a pair of fluffy socks, and I'm sitting cross-legged on the chair beside our front window. I'm looking down into an ashtray that I'd placed on a little metal table next to me. It was full of cigarette butts, and the word that sprung to mind when I looked at it was hopeless. It just looked hopeless, like the definition of no hope was in that ashtray. At the same time, I hear the following words inside my head. Not audibly, not like I'm having auditory hallucinations, but my own inner voice, it was just loud and clear as day. It's time to quit smoking. The time is now. There can't be any going back, and there's only one way you can achieve this. I knew I needed to pray. Lord, I know you're real, and I don't know if I'm supposed to do this or allowed to do this, and I'm sorry if I'm not, but I want to ask you if I can test you. I want to see if I ask you for this, if you actually can do this tangible thing that I will see and hold in my hand as a result. I need this gone from my life. I don't yet feel like I can do this under my own power. At this point, I hadn't yet read the Bible. Well, with the exception of course, the Gospels and some of the Old Testament. And I didn't yet understand that we are called specifically to put things into the hands of God when we know something is too big for us. The way I saw it at the time was that if this thing actually happened, it would be a miracle. So I went on praying. I'm ready to give this up, but I have no idea how to do it. I can't even imagine driving anywhere without smoking, let alone coming home in the morning after a night of work, going to bed without a cigarette first. Lord, I know you really want me to walk with you, and I really want to walk with you. Could you help me with this? Could you take this from me somehow? I want this to become a part of my past, not my future. Can you, Lord, make this happen? And I prayed this in Jesus' holy, perfect name. Amen. And I kept smoking the cigarette I had in my hand. And I put it out in the ashtray a few minutes later, walked inside, and got ready for bed. Things continued as usual for the next few weeks. I didn't think much about quitting smoking because winter was always my favorite smoking season, quote unquote. I smoked menthol cigarettes, and something about a cold, snowy day and a menthol cigarette seemed almost celebratory, you know? I did obviously remember that I had prayed this, and I also still very much wanted to quit, but simultaneously I was going through a lot and was very busy during this time, and as a result just didn't give it a whole lot of thought until December 30th. This night was no different than any other. I was sitting on the porch, and I can remember I was watching a Raw Beauty Christie video. Anyone else? Let me know in the comments. So I'm sitting there. I've got the fluffy socks, the leggings, a sweatshirt, almost like a mirror image of the original night. And I'm thinking to myself, this is the night. This is my last cigarette. It was something I just knew. And I know that the thought didn't come from me. I sat there. I finished, quote, enjoying the cigarette, end quote. I put it out. And I made a mental note, this is the last time you're going to put out a cigarette. I went inside, turned off the porch light, and got ready for bed. The next day I woke up. I thought to myself, normally, this is when I have my coffee and cigarette. But I just knew that that day I wasn't going to. And the next day, I wasn't going to. The day after, you get the point. Was it difficult during this time? Did I feel nicotine withdrawal? Yeah, I did. I had to find other things to do with my time. You know the time, if you've ever been a smoker. It sort of releases you from whatever activity you've been doing and gives you a forced break where you can just sort of sit down and gather your thoughts while you smoke away from everyone else. And I felt like I was still entitled to take a break. I just didn't have to smoke. So that's exactly what I did. I started taking these little forced non-smoke breaks, and that helped. Additionally, I exercised more, I journaled more, I dove deep into what it was about that repetitive behavior that I liked so much. And from there, I did end up learning a lot about myself during the process. That was 6.5 years ago. And during this period of time, I haven't smoked a single cigarette. I haven't held a cigarette, lit one, and the desire to smoke lasted about 3 months, and then it was gone completely. Every so often, probably about every 3 to 6 months, I'll have a fleeting thought of, boy, a cigarette sounds good. But I've come to understand that when I get this when I feel this emotional surge toward wanting to smoke, it lets me know that there's something in my life I'm trying to run away from. And then I get to dive deep into that. Does that make sense? So you guys let me know what you think. Was it a miracle? Did Jesus take smoking from me? I'm not a person who believes that Jesus is in any way a genie who magically gives you what you want. Rather, I believe that he puts us into situations and circumstances where we're given the opportunity to build whatever muscle we're going to need to either achieve the thing we're praying for or else to deal with the thing we're praying for once our prayer is answered. In this case, I do truly believe that Jesus said, I can give you the strength. You put it in my hands, I will carry this with you. And as a result, my load was much lighter in quitting. My focus on it was 50% instead of 100%. And then that dwindled and dwindled down to 0%. So yes, this is an example to me of a miracle. It was a miracle in my life anyway. I'm thrilled that I no longer smoke, and I believe I will never smoke again. The next story I want to tell you is much more of a traditional kind of miracle, a story of God intervening in a moment when nothing was working. And even if things had worked and did work, the likelihood was very great that we would result in a negative outcome nonetheless. So I'll dive into that story now. This story involves many more people than merely myself. And because it took place while I was on the job as a registered nurse working in labor and delivery, I, of course, have changed enough details as to ensure that there will be no risk of a HIPAA violation on any front. So let me get into the story. I was working my usual shift. I had a single labor patient. She was doing beautifully. She was progressing in labor. Things were going super well. She was laboring without an epidural. There were no complications present. When she got to 8 centimeters, her cervix stopped dilating. This can happen for a number of reasons, and none of these reasons are really relevant to the story, so I won't go into too much detail, but there was a legitimate reason, and we weren't able to overcome it using our medical interventions or positional interventions or any other means. Nonetheless, her baby was doing very well in utero. The fetal heart monitoring tracing showed the baby was neurologically intact, just doing very well. Lots of variability, accelerations, all the things you want to see on the monitoring tracing to assure you that the baby is healthy and safe on the inside of mom. Because of that, we didn't have to rush to the operating room to perform a cesarean section. Mom had only been in labor for something like 12 hours. So this was a very reasonable amount of time. All systems were go. Mom and Dad both verbalized being very comfortable with the cesarean section, stating, "We don't care how he gets here, we just want him here." Something I respect a lot, though I understand many people have varying beliefs and opinions on this subject. So at this point, the patient's obstetrician and a second obstetrician came in. The anesthesia provider came in. The patient was consented. We all went back to the OR. In the OR, patient was given spinal anesthesia. Everything was going great. No complications, no problems. The baby was delivered quickly and easily without any need for additional maneuvers to ease the baby's head or body out. However, this is where the story takes a turn. At this point, the baby is born, handed off to the pediatrician, and brought to the warmer. It's immediately evident that the baby is in distress. There's no crying, there's no heartbeat, there's no breathing. The baby is blue, floppy, not moving. When a baby is born with this lack of life, it's considered a significant emergency. We don't wait. We do initiate all of our neonatal resuscitation procedures, but we also call a code within the first 30 seconds because it's clear that the baby is not responding to any of our resuscitative measures. The entire code team shows up. We have an OR packed with 12 different individuals, some writing down information about what's happening, some sitting with mom at the head of the bed while the obstetrician and his assist continue with the surgery because, of course, mom's abdomen is still wide open and the surgery is still ongoing. Myself, the pediatrician, and 2 other nurses are advancing our resuscitation protocol and are now doing chest compressions in addition to attempting to deliver oxygen to the baby through a mask. This is called PPV. At this point, normally the baby would be intubated. However, the pediatrician had tried twice to intubate the baby to no avail. So we were continuing to try to push oxygen into the baby using our bag mask device with 100% oxygen hooked up. 10 minutes had gone by, and the pediatrician had tried an additional 1 time to intubate the baby. Each time the tube was in, but oxygen was simply not getting to the lungs. The baby continues to be blue, now turning a grayish color. There's no movement. There's no heartbeat. We've administered epinephrine down the tube regardless, and the pediatrician and another nurse were in the process of cannulating the umbilical vein. This is going well, thank God. I'm administering compressions, and there are additional doses of epinephrine going through. It's now been 13 minutes, and there's just this growing sense of terror in the room. Everyone knows that this is not good, because even if the baby survives at this point, the likelihood that there will be extreme and severe brain damage is high. I've gone from praying in my head intermittently to just a continuous running prayer going through my brain as I'm administering compressions to this infant. Please, Lord, save this baby. Mom and Dad are completely silent. Dad usually is positioned next to mom's head, just sitting there so he can talk to her until the baby is born, at which time we usually bring Dad over to the warmer. Of course, in this case, mom knows baby hasn't cried. Everyone's very silent in the room except for those of us who are working on the baby and communicating with one another in order to ensure that the baby is getting everything that he needs at this point. The pediatrician tries one more time to pass a tube down the baby's trachea into his lungs. And while the tube goes and all seems to be well, it still isn't able to administer air. In a last-ditch effort, as we're nearing 14 minutes, the pediatrician calls out to the anesthesia provider to please come over and attempt an intubation. Now, let me stop and just say this pediatrician is extremely skilled at neonatal resuscitation, has done thousands in his career, and there's no reason that any of us could determine in the debriefing for this to have gone so terribly wrong. This anesthesia provider trades out with another one who had come in when we had initially called the code and attempts the 5th endotracheal intubation. With this intubation, something is different and it works. Immediately, there is air going to this baby. The baby is quickly pinking up, and within 1.5 minutes is starting to cry over the tube. He's pink, he's wiggling, he looks beautiful. I have no explanation within my medical range of knowledge, which is pretty extensive, to explain why suddenly things were different. All I know is that they were. This baby was thriving. Within 30 minutes, the tube was out, and while we did transfer the baby to a higher level of care, we don't keep critical babies long term. We don't have the ability to do certain kinds of testing that would be necessary in this case to determine how the baby is doing as a result of nearly 15 minutes without oxygen after birth. The story sounds fantastical because it is. Babies are extremely resilient, and God is extremely good. At that moment, all we cared about was this baby was alive. These parents were not having to leave the operating room and ultimately leave the hospital without their child. During the whole resuscitation, what kept running through my mind was that I would be leaving work tonight knowing that one of my patients didn't survive. That was unthinkable to me. Now, I've grown in my Christian walk, and I do understand that things like this happen, and they're not always within our control. As long as we've done everything that we are capable of doing, at that point, it's up to God. So I no longer feel the way that I used to feel, which is that it's all on me. All the pressure's on me. It's completely up to me. And if the baby doesn't live, if something goes wrong, then it's completely my fault, which is sort of the mantra I told myself for the first 20 or so years of my career. I still work just as hard, and I still believe that so much of what happens in terms of my patients does lie with me and how quick I am to recognize things that are going wrong and how much I'm at the ready to intervene when I do notice such things. But I also know that I am not in control. I am not the one that's responsible for every outcome independently and without anyone else. That's far too much for anyone to carry. And as healthcare providers, it's very detrimental on an emotional and a physical level. But what you wanted to hear is, how's the baby, right? 1 year out, we got word from the pediatrician on the case that this baby was completely free from any signs of deficits related to the birth experience. We're now greater than 5 years out, and this stays true to this day. This baby survived without any perceptible oxygen getting to his brain, getting to his organs, and he's thriving in this world. That is the truest miracle I've ever seen. When you're right there and you know everything rationally is telling you that this should not work out, but then it does. God is good all the time. So let me know down in the comments, what do you think? Is this a miracle? Am I a wingnut? Am I a Looney Tune? I know my answer. Please let me know yours. In the next video, I plan to discuss an idea I have to bring attention to others who are creative people, who want people to see what they're making and doing in the world to glorify God. People that maybe don't have the time or the interest in pursuing social media or having a YouTube channel or a blog or anything, but still want greater attention brought to their nonprofit or their pursuit to bring good things to the lives of others. I'll be covering that in detail in the next video. And again, I thank you so much for being here. I hope you have an absolutely beautiful day. Bye-bye.
This big black cloud is coming down. Falling angels all around. A warm breeze from the subway underground. resuscitating